Okay, hello everybody. Good morning, good afternoon from wherever you are joining us. Thank you for being here for a part of our 2023 CIHS book series, Teachings, Conversations in Consciousness. Our March edition brings you Dr. Tobi Zausner. We are so excited to have her today to discuss her new book, The Creative Trance, Altered States of Consciousness and Creativity. And I'm also joined here today by CIHS President, Dr. Thomas Brophy. Like I said, please accept our warm welcome from the California Institute for Human Science. And before we get going, I just wanted to let you know my name is Nicole Ryle, and I am the Director of Development and Public Programs here at CIHS. And I'm so happy to come to you today with our March edition of this book series. The CIHS Enlighten is the division of the California Institute for Human Science that offers public programs like the one here today, special workshops, certificate programs, and continuing education. And we wouldn't be able to offer these programs without the support of viewers like you who are here today. So I'd like to extend a thank you for being a part of our community. And if you feel moved throughout the program, you can text CIHS to this number 801-801 to donate for our book series today. And I will also be able to pop a link in the chat box later and field some questions. Q&A will be available towards the end of our program. So if you have any questions that come up during the course of our presentation, just jot them down or keep them in your memory, and you'll be able to use the Q&A box to ask your questions, or to raise your hand and speak your question if you'd like to do so as well. Okay, so without further ado, I will turn it over to our CIHS President, Dr. Thomas Brophy.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thanks, Thomas.
Yes. Welcome to this very special live event at California Institute for Human Science, part of our special 2023 book series. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce today's presenter, who is very much connected with CIHS's mission and the philosophy of CIHS's founder, Dr. Hiroshi Motoyama. And today's topic is especially applicable and we think will be helpful for people attending. The topic, the creative trance, altered states of consciousness and creativity. Dr. Tobi Zausner is a research psychologist and also a clinical social worker licensed in 3 states, New York, New Jersey, and Illinois. She's also an award-winning visual artist with works in major museums, and I think some right behind her in her visual, and in private collections around the world. Dr. Zausner writes and lectures widely on psychology and human potential at academic conferences and charitable events. Now, today's event was set up to include a little bit of Q&A with Anne-Marie Cushing. Anne-Marie Cushing, who is a visionary architect, educator, and advocate for health reform. She's an advisor to national and international health organizations, providing leadership and strategic envisioning of health reform. She served as co-chair of the executive committee board of the famous and extraordinary New York Open Center. And most fortunately for us at CIHS, Anne-Marie is a trustee of CIHS. But Anne-Marie is having technical difficulties. So we'll just see if she's able to join. But no worries, Dr. Zausner is well prepared to give a wonderful presentation. And at the end of the presentation, we will have a period of question and answer. I believe Nicole will coordinate all of that. And so now I will turn it over to Tobi Zausner.
Oh, thank you, Thomas. Well, welcome everyone. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me to be part of your teachings, which is a great word, of the book series. And I'm going to be speaking today on my book, The Creative Trance, Altered States of Consciousness and Creative Process. And I hope it will benefit you. I hope this speech will give you something to, they say, take home with and make your life better. and know that you're more than you think you are and have great riches within you. So shall I start the talk now? Shall I start the share screen? Okay, folks, do a share screen. Okay, now we'll go into show mode.
Perfect.
Oh, there we are.
There you go.
Hey, I hope all of you can see this. And, you know, inherent in all of us are many possibilities. And among those possibilities are altered states of consciousness, many of them. And we enter these altered states every time we're creative. Now, of course, excuse me, waking consciousness is fundamental to daily living, but there are other many altered states of consciousness that arise when we're creative. And they're different from every one person to another, but they're all aspects of a creative trance. Here it is. The creative trance occurs in altered states of consciousness across creative domains. And this is every day. We enter these every day. Every time you think about something in the past, you're remembering. Every time maybe you're stuck in traffic and you're trying to visualize, how can I get home today when all my regular routes are cut off? That's creative. And that visualization is an aspect of the creative trance. And it's inherent in all cultures. And it manifests across all the domains in the arts, the sciences, sports. And it can range from, you know, what am I going to do with my garden? How can I plant this or that? Or what about my doctoral dissertation? And it also contains visualizations that can alter civilizations. It appears in daydreams, night dreams, visualizations, meditation, focused attention, remembering, planning, absorption, immersion, and flow. And I know that you have experienced many of these states. And so you have been in a creative trance, you didn't realize it. But now maybe you will, and you'll see how deep it can be and how much you can do. And this is my book. I was so interested in the creative trance, I actually wrote a book about it. I started the research 20 years ago, and it forms the foundation of my talk today. It was published by Cambridge, and it functions as a textbook and a trade book because it's interesting to read. And at the bottom is my website, and you can find more information there. So let's start with daydreaming, since we all do this, daydreaming and visualization. So let's look at some daydreams that have changed the world. Well, we all know Einstein, and here's a light beam. Excuse me. When Einstein was 16 years old, he had a daydream, and he imagined himself riding a light beam. And this experience in daydreaming became a basis for his theory of relativity. But you know, it can be hard for a daydreaming child. Einstein was daydreaming his whole life, and his teachers told his parents that the boy was slow, and he daydreams all the time, and he would never amount to anything. So now you know he amounted to a great deal, and daydreams were important. And Einstein believed in imagination. He said, knowledge is limited, but imagination circles the world. Let's look at another Nobel Prize winner who daydreams. This is James Black. And he said, I daydream like mad. Black, he developed the beta blocker, propranolol, that calms the heart. He also invented cimetidine, and that treated gastric ulcers. And he got the Nobel Prize for his work in 2022. He's described his creative process as a visualization. He said it was an imaginative sense, entirely open-ended and entirely pictorial, and he enjoyed it enormously. Here's another daydreamer, Leonardo da Vinci. We think that's a portrait of him on the left. I mean, art historians, and I used to be one, say this is ascribed to, presumed to be, but there he is. And there are some of his inventions. There's his helicopter, his parachute, and his spring-driven car. And these were invented hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And yet his drawings and the words to his drawings are so complete that all of them could be reconstructed today. But like Einstein, Leonardo got in trouble for daydreaming. One of his patrons reported Leonardo to Duke Ludovico Sforza of Milan and said, "This man doesn't work. He does nothing but think." In his defense, Leonardo said, "The mind must first imagine what the hands later create." And he drew these so well, and these were centuries ahead of his time. Let's look at another daydreamer's work. Frank Lloyd Wright. And here is his Guggenheim, which is in my hometown, New York. It's a wonderful museum. Also started daydreaming in childhood. He would daydream so deeply that his uncle would have to shout at him to wake him up. But his daydreaming was so clear that he could imagine projects in his mind so completely and draw them so beautifully and then present them to the client with almost no changes. You know, he would present a final piece of work to a client because he daydreamed. And this, as I said, this intensive visualization, often it does start early in life. Well, the creative trance has many aspects. Let's look at when the altered state is its own world. And this can happen in many ways. Here's another Nobel Prize winner. I figure if I would show you a lot of Nobel Prize winners, it would be very convincing. And you could say, well, if they daydream, I can daydream. If they make something, I can make something. And I know you can. So here's Barbara McClintock. And in her work, she's a cytogeneticist. And in her work, she would imagine herself, looking through her in a microscope, imagine herself transported into the corn cells. And while she was there, she could see the mobility of their genetic elements. And the mobility of genetic elements is what gave her the prize, the Nobel Prize. And she said when she was inside the corn cell, when she looked at their elements, she said, they're so familiar to me. They're like friends whenever she would come back to visit. Sometimes a creative trance is an exterior event, and it's the outer world that becomes more alive in a creative trance. Then, instead of lessening, stimuli from the outside world seem to magnify and alter and enhance the altered state. Generally, when we're in a creative trance, stimuli lessen, but there are times when external stimuli actually promote this state of reverie and trance. And this happened to the primatologist you see here, Jane Goodall, who she recalled a sense of wonder and awe when she was working with the chimpanzees of Gombe National Park in Tanzania. You see how they love her. I love this image. It had been raining heavily, but then suddenly the rain ceased, and Goodall said, I could smell the wet hair on the chimpanzees, and I could hear the insects singing loudly, and I just felt absolutely at one. So let's now look at levels and aspects of a creative trance. The American Psychological Association distinguishes 3 levels of a hypnotic trance: light, medium, and deep. And there seem to be also 3 levels of a creative trance. A light trance would correspond to Csikszentmihalyi. He's such a nice man. I mean, didn't pronounce his name correctly, model of flow, and a medium level of trance would have more absorption. And during the altered state of consciousness of a deep creative trance, immersion and concentration on the work can eradicate all distractions. In other words, the outside world ceases to exist, and the whole universe seems to be comprised of the creative person and the work in progress. Let's look at this. These are slides, two paintings by Parmigianino, and he was born Francesco Mazzuola, but he's known in art history as Parmigianino, and he's in the 16th century artist. The self-portrait's on the left, and on the right is a portrait of Galatea San Vitale. An interesting coincidence is they're both wearing red hats, but that doesn't affect a creative trance. Parmigianino, it was the year 1527, and Parmigiano was so involved in painting that he didn't hear that outside his studio window there was enormous ruckus, and he didn't hear anything until German soldiers had invaded his studio. It was the sack of Rome. He was so busy painting, he didn't notice it. But the soldiers were so taken with his work that they just asked for a few watercolor drawings and left him unharmed. Let's see a deep creative trance in sports. And here is Jack Snow, who used to play for the Los Angeles Rams. He describes his experience in football as a form of self-hypnosis to get him into such a deep state that Snow said, if a plane crashed in the stadium, I wouldn't know it until the play was over. Here's another deep creative trance in sports. Sports are very creative. If you're wondering why I'm including this, I believe that sports are a creative activity, and I admire them. So here's Roger Bannister. He also experienced a very deep creative trance when he was running to break the record of the 4-minute mile. You see him here and all the press in the background. And he said, to show you the altered state, there was no pain, only a great unity of movement and aim. The world seemed to stand still and did not exist. He said the only reality was the next 200 yards of track underneath my feet. And here is Maud Lewis. She's a folk artist, Canadian folk artist, and the pain-reducing or analgesic aspect of the creative trance was very important for her, because as you see, she had rheumatoid arthritis. It started in childhood, and for some people it stops, but for Maud Lewis it continued throughout her life and gave her great pain. But you see how she's holding her brushes. And you can see, of course, how her hands are affected. But Lewis said, as long as I've got a brush in front of me, I'm all right. And this is one of her paintings, Oxen in Spring. And here's another instance of creative trance and disabilities. And the creative trance happens to everybody, no matter your level of ability or disability. Everybody can have this experience. And here you see Marissa Hamamoto and Pietro Iwanicki in their gravity wheelchair dance. It's so beautiful. It's online, and you can look it up under that. She is now able-bodied. She used to be paraplegic, but they're dancing together. And Pietro Iwanicki is a world champion wheelchair dancer and a multiple gold medal winner for paradance at the International Paralympics. Iwanicki is also a civil engineer, and he was born with spina bifida, where this is a condition where the spine does not close. And he's used a wheelchair all his life. But in a creative trance, when I'm dancing on the dance floor, nothing matters at all. He said, dancing is my life. It's my passion. Iwanicki also teaches dance, and he believes It doesn't matter if you're using crutches, a wheelchair, a power chair. He says you can always dance. And this is a picture of him. And here is Marissa Hamamoto. You see her in the center, and these are her dancers from her school, Infinite Flow Dance, which is a ballroom dance company that has combined people with abilities, different ways, and disabilities, people of all abilities. It is inclusive. And you can see some of her smiling dancers there. She's now able-bodied, but as I said before, she was completely disabled. She had a stroke in her spine, and doctors told her she'd never walk again, she'd never move again. But even though they said that, Hamamoto said she would dance. Lying in her hospital bed after the stroke, she used visualization, which is central to a creative trance, to see herself dancing again. She visualized herself repeatedly dancing the complex ballet sequences she learned as a child and a young adult from her classical training. These ballet routines activated her brain to the experience of movement, and she was walking again within a month. I go into this more deeply in the book and the actual neurophysiological mechanisms. But Hamamoto eventually established an inclusive dance company. You see it here, Infinite Flow, a wheelchair dance company, and she's bringing dance to people of all ages and abilities. With her goal, innovation, inclusion, and transformation through dance and movement. This is Ichiku Kubota, and another aspect of the creative trance is that it can be altered and intensified by illness. And Kubota is a textile and kimono designer. And he had acute hepatitis. He was in the hospital for several weeks, but he said about his experience of acute hepatitis, it was the time of deepest import to me in my life as an artist. Afterward, he redesigned an ancient tradition of Japanese textiles and kimonos, as you can see here by the kimono on the right. Now, let's look at another aspect of creative trance, dreams and related states of consciousness, hypnagogic and hypnopompic. Hypnagogic is when we go to sleep and we have images before we dream. Hypnopompic is on waking, we have images before we're completely awake. And all of those states can be sites of a creative trance. What you see here, this beautiful bronze head from the Benin culture of Africa. The Benin people, it's about 18th century, it's the head of an Oba king. And the Benin people of Africa believe the deity Olokun inspires creativity through states of reverie and through dreams. This is an Australian painting, and it's called Kungarala Kukulpa, or the Seven Sisters. It's a Dreamtime work by the Australian Aboriginal artist Memi Ngintia Butler. It's made of tiny painted dots, as you can see, and it depicts the Dreamtime myth of Orion chasing the Pleiades, also known as the Seven Sisters. So it's based on astronomical views with mythology. For Australian Aborigines, Dreamtime is both an altered state of consciousness, but it's also a parallel world of ancestors and the divine that they enter into in their altered state. And it's central to their art, mythology, and culture. And this is how they do their work. They enter dream time. Dreams are important in Western civilization too. Here is Elias Howe and his sewing machine. He actually invented part of this machine in a dream that was more like a nightmare. Excuse me. One day he was working on the last part of the machine. It was the needle. And without a good needle, the machine didn't work. And he was so frustrated and nothing was working. And so he went to bed frustrated, and he had a dream that was more like a nightmare. In the dream, he's surrounded by these angry warriors, and they all have these spears, but he noticed that their spears looked like sewing machine needles, and that the holes in their spears were near the tip and not in the middle where he had put the hole in his sewing machine needles. Well, the dream was partly lucid because he realized this. He woke up and he went down to his workshop and he fashioned another needle with a hole near the tip, and his sewing machine worked. It revolutionized the textile industry, changed civilization, created mass-produced clothing and employment opportunities for women. So the hypnagogic and hypnopompic states between wakefulness and sleep can also be times of a creative trance. Here's Mary Shelley, and this is the frontispiece for the first edition, the 1831 edition of Frankenstein, her most famous work. She also had a hard day and a hard night, and it was a very restless summer night, and she was unable to sleep. She couldn't get to sleep. But in the hypnagogic state, she said, with her eyes completely closed, she saw a series of images of a scientist bending over his, quote, unholy creation. And that became the basis for her novel, Frankenstein. This is Marian Anderson. She was a great contralto, and for her, the time before sleep was when she, quote, lived in the music of the mood. And she said she was lost in the spirit of the song. And she described music as an elusive thing, and said, after a long struggle with the song, suddenly there's a flash of insight. And what appeared useless labor for days, all of a sudden, it becomes fruitful at an unpredictable moment. Now, Anderson's type of sudden insights, and I'm sure we've all had sudden insights. All of a sudden we realize, oh, that's it. Well, now, they're now mapped by neuroscience. Kunios and Beeman found that when a creative solution flashes into conscious awareness, it may be accompanied by a burst of gamma waves in the right temporal lobe of the brain, specifically in the anterior superior temporal gyrus, back here. So neuroscience, nonlinear dynamics play a great part in the multiple states of the creative trance, and we're going to look at multiple different states of creative consciousness. I'm just doing this briefly here. I go into it more deeply in the book, but the neuroscience of the creative trance. Creativity actually activates multiple brain regions, and it reveals a heterogeneity of creative trance states. And there's the medial temporal lobe network, memory network. If you're doing a painting from memory, or if you're writing something from memory, Yeats said memory was his great source of inspiration, then that's the part of the brain you're activating. The prefrontal cortex, when you're analyzing your work, that's the part of the brain you're using, both brain hemispheres. And of course, significantly, the default mode network, which is associated with divergent thinking and daydreaming. It's a series of brain areas that will come into, I can't say light up, but on a scan they would light up. But it's a series of brain regions that come into activity when we're imagining things. And creativity is enjoyable because, we see it's associated with the release of dopamine, endorphins, serotonin, oxytocin, and it's also a nonlinear state. And here's the nonlinear dynamics of the creative trance. And the creative trance is modeled as a creative chaos that brings forth new work and personal transformation. Chaos is not disorder. Chaos actually can be the beginning of a new world. We celebrate our New Year. New Year's parties are chaotic, but they bring in the new year. And with its disciplines of chaos theory, complexity theory, And nonlinear dynamics explains processes like creativity, and because they don't proceed in straight lines. They're not predictable. They never exactly repeat themselves, but they have the capacity for originality and change. You know, unlike the Newtonian clockwork universe, which only has two variables, we live in a world of multiple variables. And when you get three or more, it's called the n-body problem, you get chaos. And chaos is really good, because in chaos comes invention. And I'd like to say that William James knew that there were many states of consciousness. And he said, our normal waking consciousness, rational consciousness, as we call it, it's just one special type of consciousness. And all the others, separated by the filmiest of screens, they're like potential forms of consciousness, entirely different. And we may go through life without even suspecting them, but if you apply the requisite stimulus, they're there completely. And I believe one of the most common stimuli is creativity, because it brings us into altered states, and each type of creativity will bring us into a different type of altered state. And as I said at the beginning of the talk, everybody will have their own altered states of consciousness. It's very personal, but that's one of the things that makes it so wonderful. So why don't we look at something that's very, very interesting? It's multiple locations of consciousness during creativity. And the experiences that are often, creativity has external sources of inspiration. In other words, it happens outside ourselves, that we don't feel responsible for the creative work we do because of certain types of consciousness that make us feel that there are other locations of consciousness involved. And here's a portrait of Percy Bysshe Shelley, and he was the husband of Mary Shelley, and he was a poet, and he said, one after another, the greatest writers, poets, and artists confirm the fact that their work comes to them from beyond the threshold of consciousness. It really enlarges our lives, doesn't it? That we realize that our consciousness has such capacity, such depth and breadth. And here is Thomas Edison, busy inventing the phonograph. And he said, people say I've created things. And he insisted, he said, I've never created anything. He said, I get impressions from the universe at large, I work them out. He called himself a plate or a record or a receiving apparatus. It all came to him and through him. And that is a secular experience of inspiration. And here is an inspiration that has a divine experience of inspiration. This is Srinivas Ramanujan, great Indian mathematician. You see him on the right and his notes on the left. Although Edison experienced his external inspiration as secular, but for spiritual people like Ramanujan, outside sources of inspiration may appear to come from the divine. And this is an experience that occurs across cultures and domains. Ramanujan said the goddess Namagiri came to him in dreams at night and gave him mathematical formulas. But he was ready. He had a notebook by his bed, and he would write down these mathematical formulas, but then it took him months to work them out, laboriously working out the mathematical formulas. This way he could present them to the world. Here's another person with outside inspiration. On the left is Giacomo Puccini. On the right is the soprano Hui Hei as Madame Butterfly. She was performing at the Dallas Opera. And in an interview with the musicologist Arthur Abel, Puccini insisted that the music from Madame Butterfly, and I quote, was dictated to me by God. I was merely instrumental in putting it on paper and communicating it to the public. In other words, he was the vehicle. Then Abel reminded Puccini, but to do all that, you had to have knowledge and technical skill of a high order. And Puccini said, of course, that's self-understood. But then he added that without divine inspiration, despite all the laborious application and technical mastery, nothing of value will come. You must have that feeling of divine inspiration. And Stevie Wonder agrees with him. This is the singer, songwriter, humanitarian, musician, Stevie Wonder. And he also sees his music as coming from a divine source. And you can see his CDs on the left. And he says, I'm only being used as a vehicle through which comes encouragement, inspiration, hope, and some clarity. Very beautiful humility. And so Stevie Wonder says, it's an honor to do this. He says, and I never forget the honor. Extraordinary humility. There's some very interesting things can go on during the creative process. And one of them is that there seem to be different locations of consciousness, and that the work can at times seem to dictate its own creation. This may sound odd, but it happens. Here you see Joan Mitchell. She's a painter, an abstract painter in her studio, and she describes this phenomenon. And she said, I sit and look at the painting, sometimes for hours. Eventually, she said, the painting tells me what to do. And here is Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche. And he said, the experience of a creative work controlling the creator takes many forms. And Nietzsche said, one hears, one does not seek. One takes, one does not ask. Everything occurs without volition. And here we see it in music. The same experience, outside inspiration and the creativity controls the creator. This is Rosalind Turek. And you see the logo for the Rosalind Turek International Bach Competition. The pianist Rosalind Turek insisted, I do what Bach tells me to do. I never tell the music what to do. It was obviously a good way to work because, as you can see, this international competition was named in her honor. But why would this occur? Why would a creator become an employee of the work she creates? What would be a clinical explanation for the pervasive dictatorships by work of art? So psychologically, in this altered state of consciousness, we could say there's a projective identification, which is an unconscious projection of a part of the artist onto the work that's being created. And the fusion of artistic projection with ongoing work generates a hierarchy of power in the artist's mind, with an external locus control in the art. In other words, they are projecting a part of themselves into the work, and they regard that part as higher than themselves. And this results in a transfer of creative executive function from the artist to the developing work. Melanie Klein had pathologized the concept of projective identification as personality splitting, resulting in loss of control in interpersonal relations. But during the creative process, it appears to be a widespread and non-pathological experience. So, would it be advisable for a creative person to go against the wishes of a work in progress? No, I can attest from personal experience that for me, it's neither advisable nor possible. That's my work called The Pilgrim. If you want the best results, my work tells me what to do, even if I don't agree. And here's the painting called The Pilgrim. My painting, this figure is all of us with our loads to carry and our paths to travel. Although I tried pushing back against the will of this painting, the painting won, I lost. I wanted to paint a nice garden where the figure could rest. I thought, wasn't that nice? He's gone so far. Let him rest. Look, foliage. But the painting kept insisting on a road in the foreground so he could keep walking. This made me so angry. But none of the gardens I painted in the foreground were acceptable. Finally, I gave in and painted the road. As you see, he's coming off the white stones onto this sort of sandy dirt road. It was the best and only solution. A reason that creative people willingly accept this control is that coming from the unconscious mind, it results in much better work. In other words, it's our unconscious telling us in a conscious manner what to do. Our linear sequential waking consciousness is no match for the vast parallel processing capacities of the unconscious mind. It knows more than waking consciousness. Further indication that the creative trance is an altered state of non-local consciousness comes from instances of expanded awareness during the creative process. While I was struggling to paint these white stones, I had other stones, I had wood, nothing worked. And then all of a sudden, in my mind's eye, I saw these beautiful white stones. And I said, oh, that's what I'm going to put in my painting. I painted them, and then 6 months later, on a trip to San Francisco, I saw the exact stones that I had painted months earlier in New York. Another unusual event occurred when I was during my painting called Memories. This is a painting about carrying unnecessary baggage, which we all do, and we should jettison. And of course, it's not a real landscape, it's a mind landscape. It's a mindscape, because who could carry bundles through the snow with tiny wheels? But the figure is reeling, she is struggling. And again, this figure is all of us. The unusual occurrence happened when I was trying to paint the clouds at the top of the canvas. Do you see the structure of the clouds? I've been painting for hours. It was 2 or 3 in the morning. I was so tired and so angry, and I just could not look at the painting anymore, and I couldn't stop painting. So my solution was to paint without looking. And I turned my head away and just painted. The only thing I looked was on my palette, load the brush up with more paint, and then paint without looking. I was so frustrated. Then it was as if, then all of a sudden I looked up and I could see that I had actually painted a structure of clouds across the top that I could use for the finished painting. Here they're, of course, covered with glazes and, brought to a fine finish. But it was as if I had transferred conscious control during this experience from my head to my hand and arm. And Carl Jung said, often the hands know how to solve a riddle with which the intellect has wrestled in vain. So it's true, after I looked up and I saw the acceptable underlying structure of clouds, that's what happened here. And perhaps in a creative trance with its pronounced dominance of the unconscious, we may have greater access to implicit muscle memory. This is another aspect, unusual aspect of the creative trance. It's the experience of multiple locations of consciousness during creativity, and when aspects of the creative work seem to come alive. In other words, not only does it tell you what to do, but it becomes an entity with which you can interact. This happened with Alice Walker and her novel, The Color Purple. And this consciousness is one of the most interesting states of consciousness. And it comes alive with entities that seem separate from their human creator. And in this state, authors like Alice Walker may experience the fictional characters that they're writing appear as autonomous beings that chart their own course of action, often changing the script of the original plot. In other words, they change it from what the conscious mind had decided. Here, the unconscious mind becomes the director, and the conscious mind becomes the scribe. It writes what the unconscious dictates. So when Alice Walker was working on her novel, and she is here the color purple, her characters came alive for her, but they complained they didn't like living in Brooklyn. Too many tall buildings, they said. They were really angry. So Walker moved to San Francisco, but they didn't like it there either, too urban. Finally, after renting a small cottage in Boonville in Northern California, which was more like the rural setting of the novel, the characters became friendly again and talkative. And Alice Walker said, we would sit wherever I was sitting and talk, said Walker. They were very obliging, engaging, and jolly. Non-human aspects of the creative trance can come alive also. This is Nikola Tesla, and here you see his solid state Tesla coil producing a brush discharge. So sometimes the seemingly inanimate can come to life in a creative trance. Nikola Tesla, who is shown here, could imagine the machines that he invented or was in the process of inventing so vividly, and he saw them in his mind so vividly, that he was able to set them running in his mind and then check on them later to see if they showed signs of wear. And here's another author whose people in her work come alive. In fact, for Ursula Le Guin, a whole landscape came alive. Creative products can have such autonomy that they can evolve in the unconscious mind without the person being aware of them. After her first Earth Tree novels, Ursula Le Guin thought she was finished, but then readers loved her work. They said, oh, we would like more. When Ursula Le Guin looked inside herself, she saw that the world she had written about, Earthsea, that it had changed over the years without her realizing it consciously. So she said, oh, I will write again. She wrote another three works in the series. Le Guin also had fictional characters that came alive. She wrote, the one that surprised me most was Sesserac. She said, I was never sure what she was going to do or say next. I didn't even know what she looked like until she burst out of her red tent. This coming alive of creative work also happened to me. Here is an archival print of a pastel drawing I did. It's called The Eternal Present. And I think in the divine state, all time is eternally present. So you see her with all her hands, like a Kuan Yin statue. So when I was working on the pastel drawing that eventually became this archival print, the little Buddhist nun came alive for me as an internal vision. Now, I'll tell you, she couldn't have existed anywhere else. I took this from old photographs and other material. She did not exist except in this drawing. I was having difficulties with her hands, especially the fingers. Oh my gosh, and she got 6 hands. So finally, in frustration, I lay down, I closed my eyes, and then suddenly, either in a hypnagogic or meditative state, I saw the little nun as a gentle, smiling, spiritual, and completely real person. She was alive. She was a breathing person in my vision. So she was sitting under diffuse light from above, and she was opening and closing her hand to show me her fingers. After studying the way she opened and closed her fingers, I could draw them. I was able to do that accurately. Searching for psychological explanations of these seemingly real, outward autonomous entities generated through creativity, one could postulate that they echo different aspects of the personality that are engaged in the parts work of clinical disciplines, such as ego state therapy and internal family systems. I regularly do parts work with clinical hypnosis with my patients, so we all have parts, but she was alive. This was such an experience. There may be an additional explanation. As we know, there is a liminal boundary between the psychological and the spiritual. And perhaps these entities that we see that come alive for us in our work exist on both sides of a very porous and interactive divide. And a woman who spoke about this was the great Tibetan scholar, Alexandra David Neal. Here she is riding on a yak and a portrait photo of her. According to Alexandra David Neal, Tibetan Buddhism would have identified these seemingly autonomous figurative entities as a type of thought form called a tulpa. She describes them as manifestations of concentrated mental energy. And interesting, she recounts seeing a thought form behind a painter, and she said it looked just like one of the figures in his work. By regarding creative tulpas as manifestations of the mind, psychology could seek to uncover their neural signatures. In other words, they could be quantified. The experience might be quantified. Perhaps someone out there who's watching this might design neuroscience experiments that map the dynamics of thought forms during creativity. It would be fabulous. This connection between the physical and the spiritual would be a quantification of the transpersonal. So, in summation, during the altered states of consciousness and the creative trance, I hope you realize that you and all of us have enormous potential. So I'd like to say, respect your inner life. Someday it may change the world. And here are my photo credits and the book again. And it has been my pleasure to share these examples of a creative trance with you. Thank you. I don't know if I can, oh, Nicole, how nice you've come on.
Hi, thank you so much, Tobi. That was very enlightening and inspiring. I especially loved the wheelchair dancers. I have not seen that before, and I can totally see how they would step into that trance, and all abilities are able to do that. It's a state of consciousness, huh?
You're so right, and they're located in Los Angeles, not far from you. She has this wonderful school, Infinite Flow. What she had, that paralysis is what I call a transforming illness. When your life transforms during a period of illness. I wrote a book on it. Because it happened to me and it happens to so many other people I've seen. And it happened to Voda.
So interesting. That is a transformative time when you have a drastic change in your life.
Exactly. It functions as a creative chaos. It's a time the new can come in. It's a deterministic chaos, actually.
Yeah. So interesting. Well, I'm happy to say that Anne-Marie Cushing is able to join us. She is logged in and she was able to view most of your presentation. So hi, Anne-Marie, welcome. Why don't we have a little discussion with Anne-Marie and yourself, and then we'll turn it over to audience questions, okay?
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, Anne-Marie.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. And thank you, Tobi. I'm so sorry I had technical problems, but I'm here. So, I've seen your presentation before, but I also read your book, which I loved. Tobi and I know each other from New York and the New York world of the integrative and holistic and consciousness raising movement there. And she's written many books, actually, or one other significant book, I should say, which is called When Walls Become Doorways. So, and then, of course, this beautiful, the creative trance, the altered states of consciousness and creative process. So, Tobi, please forgive me if you mentioned it and I did not hear it. But as you mentioned before, the creative trance and altered states of consciousness, that we all have it every day, or can have it every day. Yes, and it's always inherent in all cultures, throughout all time. So when you're manifesting domains, like you say, in the sports or the sciences, you gave all these various wonderful examples in the arts and the creative, you bring in that you can use the creative trance so that you can sort of have reveries of everyday life. And it can often come in through daydreams or night dreams or visualizations or meditations or just planning, which I find interesting, and absorptions and immersions, all types of different flow. Can you tell us about your own process when you are doing your work, particularly your painting, which, by the way, I hope if any of you get to New York, you might want to look her up and see her work, or certainly online.
Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, my work is online. Thank you, Emery. I've been a daydreamer my whole life. And I started realizing about the trance state when I noticed I have ADD. I write about that in the book. I have ADD and dyslexia both. So that's my feeling for people with disabilities, because I have my own disabilities. And people with ADD like to have music in the background because it helps stimulate a kind of a little bit of a sleepy brain. But when I'm working really intensely, I don't hear the music at all. I work in absolute silence, no matter what's going on in the background. And that's when I really realized, my gosh, this is an altered state. And when I was doing research for the transforming illness, and I was reading the lives of so many artists. I'm also an art historian, and I saw so many altered states of consciousness. So I started creating a file called The Creative Trance. Little did I know it would become a book, but anyway, we all have this. It's as if we're filled with jewels. And when we go into an altered state, those jewels shine. It's like having an inward sun that brings light onto your capacities that were there all the time.
Yes, Toby, did you mention through your presentation about how the altered states on a physiological, scientific aspect, what happens to an individual, or is it too complex to go into? But I've read it, certainly.
Yeah, I read it. I wrote extensively in the book about that, and also about the altered states of meditators and the idea of transcendence, and how the creative trance can be a step to transcendence. The creative trance itself is not transcendence, but it can lead to it. And I wrote in the book all about the altered states of consciousness in the Buddhist jhanas and other disciplines. And it was meaningful to me. I've been meditating now for 50 years. So that's a wonderful altered state that we can go into. And we all have this. I see I'm still sharing my screen, so perhaps I should stop sharing.
There you are.
I'm sorry. So
and
nice to see everyone. I feel this is lovely to see all of you.
Yeah, nice to see you though too. And so you mentioned you have a wonderful chapter on dementia and the creative trance. Do you want to talk about that? Because of course we have a lot on the news about dementia, more and more, and it's becoming more prevalent in our society and more, observable, and also more studied as well and written about. So can you maybe give us a little bit of an idea about what you write about?
Yes, as you say, we're an aging population, and the fastest growing cohort in the whole world of people 85 and over. And so dementia is a factor in a larger and larger portion of the population. But even with dementia, you can have a creative trance and do beautiful work. And there's a special type of dementia actually that facilitates this. It's frontotemporal dementia. And Ravel had this. What it comes with a very difficult aphasia, so it became increasingly hard for him to speak and read. And it was, in a sense, heartbreaking. He had this most beautiful opera in his mind, Joan of Arc, but we'll never know it because he couldn't write it down. But what happened at the beginning of his dementia was it actually increased his abilities. His bolero, Ravel's bolero? It's my favorite word. I love that word.
Yeah.
That was done at the beginning of frontotemporal dementia, when his sensitivity to beats and very discordant and loud and soft came. And there was an artist, and she had frontotemporal dementia. She recognized that he had the same illness that she had.
Mhm.
But Iris Murdoch, I think it is, wrote her last book in the early stages of Alzheimer's. People can function more than they realize. De Kooning had advanced Alzheimer's, and he was doing paintings. In
Mhm.
truth, they were not quite as complicated as his earlier work, but they were still good. I think because he had so much implicit muscle memory that
Mhm.
he really had capacity. The paintings contain beautiful arabesques. So I have a whole chapter on dementia and the creative trance. And so don't count anybody out is my attitude. We
So
all
with that in mind, you mentioned also, Toby, that you also have dyslexia and attention deficit
oh yeah,
disorder.
I do.
And of course you're a creative, which I think also came inherently from, I don't know, whether you have background in exposure to it as a child and
Yeah.
and whatever, but I know from looking at your work, you have tremendous talent. Do you have to have talent, innate talent, and then for that to still manifest, despite you having maybe, what we call, challenges,
Yeah.
and
But the challenges can actually make things better. I mean, Leonardo's dyslexia changed our world. If he wasn't dyslexic, he would have gone to college and he would have became a notary like his father. A notary in the Renaissance was a cross between a lawyer and accountant, but he couldn't read very well. He had developmental dyslexia. As an adult, he could read better. Child, he couldn't read, and he could never learn another language. Even though Latin was close to Italian, all the higher education in the Renaissance was done in Latin, and so that was closed to him. But because of this, and he said, I will not look to other people's writings. I'm going to be an observer of nature. He became one of the greatest observers of all time. He was an anatomist. I mean, he was a scientist. And he really ushered in the high Renaissance in painting. And he also had ADD. That's why his daydreaming got him in trouble. But during those reveries, he invented wonderful machines. And he was, I should say that many people with dyslexia, they can be so brilliant, but there's often an accompanying lowered self-image because they can't read. And I know so many people who are super bright who have dyslexia, and it's hard to get over that early time of not being able to read well. I was lucky I could read. My dyslexia came out in math. I would have been a physicist, but I can't see all the numbers in an equation. So I read physics, but I can't see all. It's really funny how I miss things. But Leonardo da Vinci, look at him. We are so lucky, aren't we, that he was dyslexic?
very lucky.
We are, but he called himself his whole life. He called himself an uomo senza lettere, a man without letters. In other words, illiterate. And and he had this pervading depression. Tell me, what has been done today? Have I done anything? Have I done anything today? You can read that in his notebooks. And look, Rodin, the great sculptor, was so dyslexic that he couldn't become a civil servant the way his nice middle-class parents wanted him to be. They tried to send him to boarding school and everything. No, it really didn't work. But when he got to art school and he saw a sculpture studio for the first time, he said, I feel as though I'm entering heaven. And he became one of the greatest sculptors in the Western tradition. So you have a whole list of people with, quote, disabilities. And you know what it is? A disability is like channeling the water just in another direction. If you have a river, the river doesn't stop with the disability. It just has a new tributary. And sometimes those beautiful new waterways change our world.
And hopefully that teachers and parents and other people will see that in a child and be able to direct it if
Oh,
otherwise, so that that we don't have them going into other situations that are much more detrimental, and
oh,
just focus it differently, channel
that's
it differently.
that's wonderful, Emery. That's what I hope. And that's what I've written about in the book. I wrote about dyslexia, and they're professional musicians who cannot read notes, but they're so fabulous in music. And so the book is all about that.
It really is everyone.
It's
Yeah,
everyone, and my other book too, but the Walls Become Doorways, because I used to be legally blind without glasses, but I was lucky to have an operation. I don't even wear glasses now. But it was hard for me, and I could just see how I wanted to paint clearly. My painting style came from my disability, because without my glasses years ago, I literally could only see to the end of my nose. I don't have a long nose either. And I wanted to see the world so clearly. So that's the world I made in my art. I made a world that was clear the way my glasses corrected it.
You have a whole chapter about empathy and disassociation in the creative trance. I found that to be one of the most interesting. Can you give it a little bit more information to the audience about that?
Yeah, empathy it's the most beautiful connection, and empathy in a Buddhist tradition can go to global empathy and oneness with the universe. But in the creative trance empathy, Temple Grandin, who had, she's very empathic with animals, and she has Asperger's. She used to have Canner's when she was a child, very more difficult type of illness. It's a difficult, and she couldn't read, she couldn't even speak, but she was given lessons. She said that opened her life. But she has great empathy for the animals. She grew up on a big ranch. She designed those animal handling facilities the way an animal would walk. She didn't have bright lights because she knew that the animals would be distressed by the bright lights. And she made everything sort of curved. And she is really, she says she's a visual thinker. And that society doesn't pay enough attention to visual thinkers. And I agree with her. And empathy, when you draw something, you become something. I'm trying to remember the name of the wonderful Chinese artist, Lang M. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, but he was famous for his bamboo, and he retained the bamboo he painted, and it was so alive. And that's what you do in painting. When I paint anything, I become my painting. And I think when people make music, they become the music. When people write, they become the writing. When people do sports, they become the sports. They become the swimmer. We can do this because our consciousness is so fluid and multifaceted. We have things we don't realize.
Oh, untappable dimensions that are deep and far and wide, and you talk about that through your consciousness and your creativity theory too a lot. And that's what the bridge of both the creative aspect and the conscious levels and how they come together are very interesting.
Oh, thank you very much.
Very good. Wonderful. So I know that there are audience members. I think we have a wonderful group of people who may want to ask a few questions. And
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes, we will. We will get to those in just a moment, but I did pop a link in the chat box, and just wanted to thank you all for your support and your attendance today. Events like this are made possible by your donations, and with your donation and also with your registration today, you are into our community. So I would love to extend a warm welcome to those of you that are new to our community. Welcome. We are kind of pride ourselves on hosting informative, inspiring, and creative events like this, and as well as guests like Dr. Tobi today. So thank you, Tobi, for being here. And thank you to Anne-Marie and Thomas for being here. And thank you to all of you that are in the audience for being here. If you enjoyed today's presentation, and even if you just got one little snippet to take away, we would appreciate your donation to help us continue to bring programming like this to you. So thank you again. Again, you can follow the link in the chat box that will take you right to the webpage, or you can really easily just text to this 801-801. So thank you again. And I also just would like to remind you that this presentation will be, it is being recorded, and it'll be offered on our YouTube channel. So if you would like to ask a question, just keep that in mind. If you would not like your name on screen, you can ask it anonymously, okay? So let's move to questions. Let's see, we have one. How does creative trance differ from McKelsey's concept of flow? Yes.
There's a great overlap between the two, and his concept of flow actually is the equivalent of a light creative trance. I write about that more extensively in the book, and I do the neuroscience. But it's when the idea of the flow state is very enjoyable. It's a time when you're relaxed, you're focused on a project, and the stimuli from the outside world seem to diminish. And you have the feeling that your capacities meet the demands of the project. It's very relaxing, very fulfilling. And this is actually a perfect example of a light creative trance.
That is Csikszentmihalyi, I think is his name.
Csikszentmihalyi. And I pronounced him wrong in the speech, yes.
Yes.
Csikszentmihalyi. His work, I really like his work on flow. And he wrote a book on flow and creativity also.
Yeah, nice parallel work to yours, definitely.
Yeah, nice.
Yes, yes. Okay, great. We have another question. What are some everyday practices that can inspire the creative trance?
Oh, what a great question. Well, and it's hard too, because I'm going to say relax, but we have so many things to do, right? Just if you can give this to yourself, if you can give yourself a few minutes, just sit down, and you don't have to do anything. Sit down. Even remembering is a creative trance state. Even remembering can have creative trance, but even remembering is an altered state of consciousness. If you can sit and just think of something, maybe think of something that you made or that someone else has made. Maybe even think of something that you cooked, a simple thing. If you cooked something for dinner and you think, that was an interesting salad, but I could put cranberries into it next time. And you're visualizing the cranberries. And then you're visualizing, now I think I'll put some slivered almonds in there. That's good for protein. And you're visualizing that. And I'm going to put some little edamames in there. I think I'll do that too. Maybe I'll change the dressing. And this is so nice. I think I'll have some friends over. And then you think of the friends. And all of that is a creative trance. It's really, really easy. As I said, even when you're stuck in traffic and you're trying to figure a new way home, and you're visualizing, should I go down street A or street B? This makes a left. Will I get to the highway more quickly? Maybe the highway's jammed. Maybe I should take side roads. All of this stuff. You're in a creative trance so many times. We're in altered states of consciousness so many times during the day. You're really good at it. You just don't realize it. Okay.
What a great answer. I love that.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Okay, we have another question. Paul Erdos once told me that in his dreams, angels would open a book which he was allowed to look at which would have the mathematical solution to the problem he was currently working on. Have you encountered many creatives who realize solutions in their dreams?
Wow, I'd like to read about that. I didn't know that because it's similar to Ramanujan's goddess Namagiri coming in with mathematical solutions. Wow. I have a whole section on dreams in the book, and lots of people, have dreams that bring forth new. The thing is, dreams are the poetry of the unconscious, and that's what I say. And we are all poets because we all have an unconscious mind. And but that sounds like a very divinely inspired dream, and that would be what Jung calls a great dream with a capital G and a capital D. So those are blessings. Not everybody gets them, but dreams are regularly places of creativity. You know the phrase, "Oh, just sleep on it. You'll feel better in the morning." "Oh, I don't know what to do. I'll sleep on it. It'll come to me in the morning." And it does. There was a very good book on dreams. I'm just trying to remember the author. It's here, and she wrote a whole book on dreams, and it's called The Committee of Sleep. If this person likes dreams, it's by Deirdre Barrett, and it's all about people dreaming and creativity. And also, dreams can show you the future because we're out of our time frame when we dream, I think. But I think consciousness is non-local. There was a very interesting book on dreams in the future and an experiment with time, John Donne, who was a soldier. He was an English engineer, a nautical engineer, beginning of the 20th century. And he was injured in World War I, and they didn't have TV or anything there. So all the soldiers would speak about their dreams. And he noticed that dreams contain the future. And he gave a wonderful idea of a dream. He said, seeing the future is like when you're in a railroad car and you look out the window of a car or bus or a regular car, you see the present coming by. But what if you got to the top of the railroad car and you looked and you could see the future and the past? Then time becomes plainer. And so wonderful things can happen, but I would really like to look up this dream about Ergos and the angel. If that person would, you have my website, so you can contact me. Just send me that information. I'd be so happy to read it.
Yes, I was going to say, Toby, do you mind if I share your email address with the attendees, and then they can contact you with any questions?
Yeah, and it's in the
Should be a
website
slide.
too.
Yes.
Yeah, is there a last slide? There should be
Oh,
something.
I put it in. I put the website, my last slide, but it's on my website. Easily.
Great. I'll throw that in the chat so you can get directly to it.
Sure.
Yes, great. Well, do we have any other questions from the audience or from our interviewees or viewers today, Anne-Marie or Thomas?
Well, I could go on for hours asking her questions. This is one of the most incredible books. I hope everybody gets an opportunity to read it. And because I think Toby brings inspiration to people who thought they maybe have a disability, let's say, or anything that's blocking them. And there's so much, ability to tap in. And she goes through the explanations of it quite extensively on a neurological basis as well, physiological, psychological. And then she has these amazing, representations, of people that we all know in our cultural aspect of life. So she gives that supportive element. So I thank you, Toby. I mean, this was just a wonderful work of art, the book itself, the writing. And I do encourage everyone, if you can, please read it, and also get her other one, which I loved, which she did many years ago, and how we first met, actually. which is when walls became doorways.
Yeah.
And so we'd love to have you come again when you write your other next book. Are you working on anything, Tobi?
I'm working on volume 2 of Creative Trance, and I would love to be a guest again. You've all been so wonderful and gracious. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Nicole and Thomas. And as always, we'd love to have the audience come and join us. And, we try to bring wonderful writers and artists such as Tobi, but we certainly would welcome another visit, Tobi, from you.
Thank you. I'm honored. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tobi. It's really, really wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Tommy.
Yes,
I
and
look
thank
forward
you
to
all.
your paper. Oh, excuse me, Nicole. Thank you.
Oh, go ahead. Thank you, Tobi.
Oh, thank you for all of your organizational skills and putting this together. I really appreciate that.
She's the best.
Yes, we
Yeah.
really appreciate you and all of your expertise in the area of consciousness, which CIHS is known for, mind, body, spirit, consciousness studies. And if you're interested in any of our academic degrees, we offer master's and PhD and bachelor's completion programs in fields of consciousness and consciousness studies. So if you haven't visited cihs.edu, please check us out there. And we look forward to seeing you next month. In April, we are going to host Dr. Richard Gold, talking about ways that we can naturally boost our immune system. So really perfect segue into spring. So thank you very much, Tobi. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Tobi. Thank you all.
We will see you soon.
Enjoy
Thank
the
you.
spring.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.